Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. After the presentation, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question, you may press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Your host of today's call is Mr. Michael Waters. Thank you. You may begin.
Thanks, Trish. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second of two Discover Global Markets Sub-Saharan Africa Conference preview webinars. As Trish explained, my name is Mike Waters, and I'm an international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service based out of the Atlanta U.S. Export Assistance Center. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for a brief market overview highlighting top prospects for U.S. exports in two of the fastest-growing economies on the planet, Tanzania and Ethiopia. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the U.S. Commercial Service, we are the export promotion arm of the Department of Commerce International Trade Administration. Our organization assists U.S.-based companies export their goods and services using a network of experienced trade professionals with offices throughout the United States and in more than 70 countries around the world. If you haven't already, be sure and connect with your local U.S. Export Assistance Center in your area to tap into this valuable resource. Visit our webpage at www.export.gov and click the Locations tab to find the office closest near you. We are joined today by three of our most senior commercial officers on the continent of Africa. Don Ney is the Regional Senior Commercial Officer based out of Johannesburg, South Africa, and will be giving us an overview of the African continent as a whole, as well as highlighting the available resources through the Commercial Service. Don will be followed by R.J. Donovan, our Senior Commercial Officer in Tanzania. R.J. will provide us with an overview of the Tanzanian market, highlighting some of the top prospects for American exports, as well as recent infrastructure projects happening on the ground today. Following R.J. will be our Senior Commercial Officer out of Ethiopia, Tayna Cole. Tayna will be covering the Ethiopian market, also highlighting top sectors for U.S. exports and discussing some recent infrastructure developments. We will close the webinar with a brief overview of the upcoming Discover Global Markets Sub-Saharan Africa Conference here in Atlanta, Georgia, November 5th and 6th, and should have time for a brief question and answer session. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Don Ney. Don, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And let me just welcome everybody. And as Mike said, thank you for taking the time today in your very, very busy schedules to join us. Just to set the scene a little bit, I'm sitting here in Pretoria, South Africa, the capital. It's about 40 miles or so away from our office in Johannesburg, which is, of course, the New York City of South Africa and the economic hub. What I want to do is just give you a brief context for the discussion today on Tanzania and Ethiopia. And I'll start just by giving you a little bit of background, personal background. I was in South Africa in the mid-'90s, right after the apartheid transition. I was there for 3.5 years. And it was very exciting times to be in South Africa to watch the major shifts that were taking place here. And I came back in June of this year after all of this time to take over our responsibilities for Sub-Saharan Africa, but based here in Johannesburg. And just for reference, from South Africa, I went to India, where I spent 7.5 years, both in South India and in Delhi. And after that, I was in Vietnam almost 5 years. And then I was managing our operations for Asia Pacific out of Washington. So following my stint here in South Africa, I did all things India, ASEAN, and China, and so forth, Asia. And as most of you would know and agree, the real boom that is going to be taking place in the foreseeable future in global trade is going to be in Asia. It's going to continue to be in Asia in terms of scale. And when I had the opportunity to consider the assignment here in South Africa, I had the good fortune of have worked with Mike Waters on the call in Atlanta for a couple of years, where I had access to some of the big corporate players that you would all recognize. And when I attended some of the senior leadership meetings with these companies and heard about their plans for Africa and why they are coming and why they are putting heavy resources for the mid to the long term, I began to become a believer. And over time, I've been convinced of the opportunities that are here. They're not for everybody. It takes right product, service, dedication, patience, and approach. But the bottom line of this presentation is that you have help. Come work with us, work through us, and we'll see if we can get you set up. Now, just having said all of that, you've had a chance to take a look at the slide with some of the numbers, and obviously 936 million people with the demographic growth rate highest in the world for any continent, of course, expected to go up to 1.5 billion by 2050. Current gross GDP, 1.6 trillion, 4.2% GDP annual growth rates. That number maybe is a little bit higher, could be a little bit higher. And currently about $450 billion in U.S. merchandise imports into Sub-Saharan Africa. We had the good fortune in Atlanta to be in a city that had Delta Airlines taking us directly to Johannesburg and other cities on the continent, and there's some other nine U.S. carriers that have direct flights to the continent. And so the continent is connected. It's growing. It's in demographics and consumers. The needs are many and varied. Go ahead, Mike. Now, just from the U.S. government's perspective, President Obama a couple of years ago launched his Doing Business in Africa initiative. And this initiative has our agency, the U.S. Department of Commerce, heavily involved, and it's all about connecting American businesses with Africa partners. This is what we do as an organization. This is what the U.S. Commercial Service does around the world. We work with American companies and try to match-make them with appropriate business partners so we can help you folks get into the markets where you would have opportunities. We also are heavily involved in supporting existing and new American investment in Africa. We do this on a daily basis from the embassy here in Pretoria, from our consulate in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and my colleagues in their embassies are on the ground on a daily basis supporting new American investment, existing and new American investment in their countries. We also work closely with, on an interagency level with our U.S. government partners, whether it be the U.S. Export-Import Bank, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, the Trade Development Agency, the Small Business Administration, all involved in access to finance and just trying to facilitate the ease of doing business. And finally, of course, we work very closely interagency at all of our U.S. missions overseas, together with our ambassadors, our State Department colleagues, the Foreign Agricultural Service and other government agencies, together with the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, and of course my colleagues at the Department of Commerce, to address and try to eliminate many of these tariff and non-tariff barriers that we find. Okay, and the momentum gathered after President Obama launched the Doing Business in Africa initiative. We've had my boss, Secretary Pritzker, come to Ghana and Nigeria on a trade mission in May. But most recently, the Africa Leaders Summit, which took place in Washington in August, was really an historic time and a moment where we had over 40 African heads of state together, not only with their ministers and their key trade types, but with significant representation from African business leaders. And we got them all together with significant representation from American business leaders. And there was a lot of cross-pollination that took place during the events and the side meetings and so forth. In fact, I've never seen such a complex gathering of folks with a lot of people putting in stellar efforts to make it work. And at the end of the day, I've never heard so many great comments coming from the participants about how unique it was that the private sector was getting together with the government folks in such close quarters for such positive purpose. So, as you may have seen from some of the press releases coming out of that, $7 billion in new financing was announced, $12 billion for the Power Africa program, which is one of the key programs in the Doing Business in Africa initiative, and the President Obama's Africa strategy. $14 billion in private sector deals were also announced. And of course, U.S. exports, these kinds of numbers support tens of thousands of U.S. and African jobs. So it's good for both sides of the fence here. Now, just so you know, our operation in the U.S. Commercial Service in Africa was for many years in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Ghana, and in Kenya. But as part of the Doing Business in Africa initiative and a deliverable from the Africa Leaders Summit, we have just doubled our presence in Africa to include, as you will hear from our guys from RJ in Tanzania and Tayna and Ethiopia today. Those are two of our new countries. They've just opened up their offices recently, and so we're up and running there, and we're up and running shortly here in Mozambique and in Angola. So we've doubled our footprint in Africa. Go ahead, Mike. And in addition to that, what we do with our State Department colleagues is we have what we call partnership post relations. These are relations that we have with the U.S. ambassadors, and it's going to be 22 countries now that we've opened up our new offices. But we have regular contact with our ambassadors and our economic officers in these embassies. And for you that have done business overseas, I can tell you, under President Obama, started with Secretary Clinton, and it's continuing under Secretary Kerry, the State Department's focus for all embassies and all missions overseas is all ambassadors are very eager to assist American businesses come into the market. And you should expect nothing but just great support and responsiveness from all of our friends and all colleagues with the State Department posts, not only in Africa but around the world. In my years in the business, there's really been a sea change over the past, I would say since the Obama administration, on how open the doors are nowadays for not only our State Department colleagues, but what we call our country team colleagues in the embassy. That these are the U.S. government agencies that have some possibility of helping American companies. We're all on the ground here to see what we can do. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there and just introduce RJ, who is parachuted into DAR, and he's sitting there now. He's sitting there at home in a kind of a shaky telephone line without a computer in front of him. So he's going to kind of have to make a beep noise, I think, when it's time for the slide to change. But why don't you go ahead and take over, RJ?
Okay. Thank you, Don. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, well, great. Well, good afternoon, good evening from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. I'm delighted to be with you today and to tell you about all the opportunities we're seeing here for U.S. businesses. I just wanted to start out by thanking Mike Waters and our amazing team in Atlanta for all the work that they've been doing, both on this conference call and for what we'll be doing in Atlanta in November. So we're looking forward to it. Let me tell you a little bit about Tanzania. As Don said, I'm rather new. Full disclosure, got on the ground about 6 weeks ago. But even within 6 weeks, it's been evident to me just where I think the major pockets of potential export sectors are for American goods and services. So as I start out, let me give you in the first slide some general facts and figures about the general economic climate here in Tanzania. It's, as Mike started out by saying, it's a high growth market here in East Africa. A little bit more than 7% growth expected for this year. And the important number and fact to keep in mind is that that's not a one-off number. That's been about the similar level for about the past 5 years. So that puts Tanzania in an interesting bucket with about 20 other countries that are experiencing that kind of growth. So very good. GDP, as you can see, 33 billion, population of about 50 million. And we're seeing a lot of potential in the energy sector, in construction, real estate, infrastructure, agricultural processing, and travel and tourism. So I want to take you through each of these one by one and tell you a little bit more about it and where we're seeing, again, some great opportunities. So, Mike, if you can switch the slide, we'll go to energy and construction and real estate. Okay, so I think overall, as soon as I got here on the ground, it was pretty much energy. As Don was saying, Power Africa is a very important part of what I'm doing every day here, looking for potential opportunities for U.S. firms in the energy sector writ large. So we're talking about everything from oil and gas all the way to renewable energies. I think that first number, only 20% of the population has access to electricity. That's a little bit low, actually. I've seen some recent figures over the past couple of days that indicate it's closer to about 30%, maybe a little bit higher. But regardless, it's low, and the country really needs to do a lot of work in the energy sector to get up to speed. So we're seeing an annual consumption growth rate of approaching 13%. Now, there's been a lot of talk here about oil and gas. There have been some major finds off of the coast of Tanzania, and as some of my folks at NCC and other agencies like to say, if that can be fully exploited and utilized by the country, Tanzania would stop becoming a developing country and would very quickly move into more of a middle market country. So there's a lot of potential there. And what we're seeing would be the turbine sector, exploration services, transmission equipment, installation, electrical metering, and the other kinds of downstream technologies that would be important for energy. So moving along to construction and real estate, as you can see, we're seeing a 12 to 15% growth over the past few years due to an unmet need for housing. As you travel around Dar es Salaam, it becomes evident really quickly that the housing situation here really needs to be upgraded. And I think that they're very open to American goods and services for housing and construction. We're seeing a potential for some high-end exports, even in terms of furniture and electronic equipment for homes. Mike, you can go ahead and go to agri-processing. So here's an interesting factoid about farming here in Tanzania. The arable land is about 20%, but only about 5% of that 20% is being permanently cultivated, even though agriculture accounts for about 25% of the GDP of Tanzania. So in terms of commercial farming, we think that there will be some very good opportunities here for agricultural processing equipment. So if any of you are involved in that, I'd be very happy to talk to you about it. Also, in terms of storage, last year, I'm told there was a 20 to 40% rate for harvest losses. So anything that can help mitigate that kind of situation, I think would play very well here. So just to wrap that up, processing, packaging, storage, I would say in terms of tractors, some of the bigger firms are exporting here, but I think in terms of smaller tractors and equipment and irrigation equipment, I think we could probably potentially see some very good opportunities there. Moving to travel and tourism. Top line here I think is very important. Tanzania is the only country that's allocated 25+% of its total landmass for wildlife parks and protected areas. Now, this could present some very good opportunities for U.S. tour operators, hoteliers, boutique hoteliers, people who want to get involved in the safari world. And in terms of the number of tourists, we're seeing what we call bed night visits per visit increasing to 11, which is actually very high for people to go on vacation, and daily expenditures of $355 or over. So in this area, again, hotel, tour operators, marketing services, we think there's a lot of untapped potential here. So let me end with, if you kind of anchor energy on the one hand, infrastructure on the other, I'm starting to call the focus that we have here in Tanzania on infrastructure, getting Tanzania up to par. And I spell that P-A-R-R, which means a focus on ports, air, rail, and roads. You can see the numbers. They're huge. Now, when you take a look at what's going on in the ports here, there are potential expansions of the Bagamoyo Port Project, the Malindi Port, the Mtwara Port, and even up in the lake areas of Tanzania. So all of these areas could be very good for U.S. firms. The same thing for air. Domestic air competition is allowed here in Tanzania. It's one of the only two. The other is South Africa. So this can present some opportunities. And lastly, rail projects. There are a number of potentially very interesting rail projects. There's a rehabilitation project on what we call the Tazara Rail between Zambia and Dar es Salaam, as well as the Central Corridor between Burundi and here again to Dodoma and then Dar es Salaam as well. So we're seeing quite a few potential opportunities on the infrastructure front, and we'll be working very hard to pass that information along to U.S. businesses as we get more of it. So that's it for me, Don. And if you want to turn it over to Tanya.
Yeah, RJ, yeah, thanks. And I'm glad the line held up. Well done. And Tanya, you're in, I think, Washington, yeah, in the Washington, D.C. area, and on your way back to Addis as soon as we can get you there. So why don't you go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Don. And one of the things that I wanted to say is I'm very passionate about Africa, and that's something that Don and Michael and my colleagues know because, you know, I've been pretty much involved in that Doing Business in Africa initiative. And as well as one of my posts that I served at was the African Development Bank. So that kind of really gave me a good feel for some of the things that were going on in Africa, especially in terms of investment and financing and infrastructure projects and market access and how to sort of get U.S. companies their fair share in these markets. I actually have just recently been back from Ethiopia, where I went there to try to set up the initial stages for opening in our office, and it was really exciting. And one of the things that I shared with Don, I was sitting in the Sheraton Hotel, which is one of the major hotels there in Ethiopia, and I felt like Lucy, you know, because I could set up office like Lucy from the Peanuts, because basically I was sitting there, and every chance that I got up to actually get up and go to my room, there was a line of companies that were there. And these are the Dells and the Johnson & Johnsons and the Black & Veatch and various companies in the healthcare sector, in the pharmaceutical, in the telecommunications sectors, and certainly the energy sector. And they had heard that, you know, President Obama had opened up these offices in Africa, and they were excited and basically saying, here, we're really excited to get involved in this market. And one of the reasons why they were, as you can see, Ethiopia has experienced, on average, 7.4% growth all the way up to, in some cases, reported as 11% growth over the past 2 years. And it is definitely a booming market, a ground-up market, and a market where there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, you're looking at a population of more than 94 million people in this market. The U.S. is the seventh largest exporter to this market, and I think it's no surprise to us. I think all of us can guess the number one exporter in the market is China. China has 21.5%. But what was interesting, as I was sitting there, I had several members of the government, including the Minister of Finance when I was sitting in the Sheraton, as well as other Ethiopians who have businesses on the ground. And they had indicated, where is the U.S.? We're very much interested in getting the U.S. over to Ethiopia because we would like to partnership with them. Yes, the Chinese are here, but there's definitely market for growth. And one of the things that they were interested in is the quality of goods and services that we provide, and also our guarantee, our after-service guarantees. And that's something that the U.S. is very good in doing. So when I took some time, I would encourage everyone on the call to actually go to the export.gov and look at the country commercial guide for Ethiopia. What that brings us to are the leading sectors for U.S. export and investment. Now, I actually highlighted these four sectors. One of the other leading sectors that was actually highlighted in the country commercial guide was road construction. But, you know, having worked at the African Development Bank, and I have a background in engineering as myself, I'm not as sure that U.S. companies can be as competitive in terms of, you know, being the project manager or the engineer on these road construction projects, because certainly China's there. They already have facilities there. They're laying out the material. But where the U.S. can be competitive is where they can bring in materials like concrete, steel, reinforcement, you know, all the different things that are in the supply chain, because the Ethiopians are now looking at some of the structures that have already been built there that are, you know, actually not stable or having to be rebuilt. So they're actually looking more down in the supply chain in terms of quality material. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight. But where there definitely is a lot of opportunity is in the renewable energy sector. Now, the Ethiopian government, they have a plan called the Growth and Transformation Plan. And if you go online, you can actually, you can look at this plan. It's a 5-year growth plan from 2010 to 2015. They're actually in the process right now revising this plan. And this becomes very important because this is essentially the roadmap. It sets forward what the Ethiopians are looking for in the next 5 years or going forward. And one of the things that highlights in terms of energy is they would like to move from 2,000 megawatts to 10,000 megawatts in renewable energy. And they have something like 45,000 megawatts on unexploited capacity. And this is not just, that's in the as well in the hydro sector. So where their areas are, and I think what we can do is, one of the things that in terms of renewable energy, they're looking at wind, geothermal, solar, and also biogas, and I'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. Tourism is another sector. It's just totally untapped, and this is something that RJ was talking about as well. The Ethiopians have set in place travel services. For example, if you were to travel into Ethiopia, certainly on Ethiopian Airlines, they already have very well-developed, coordinated schedules to various tourism sites. But what's lacking in terms are the hotels, the supplies for the hotels, the transportation process, all of those particular things that are involved in the supply chain. Even, in fact, in terms of getting the proper food and services to the specific facilities. So in that case, you know, the framework's there, the sites are there, it's developed, they have the transportation to get you there, but all the other things that go in the supply chain in terms of the infrastructure of tourism, there's tremendous opportunity, even in terms of marketing services, e-services for tourism. And this is something that they're looking at building out. And then in terms of ICT, ICT is a little bit tricky because the Ethiopian government has a monopoly on the telecommunications system. At this particular time, they haven't put in place plan in terms of privatizing this. This is something that certainly we've had a lot of conversations, meaning with the U.S. Embassy, because it's very important that people have a good ICT platform if they're going to bring in services and open up offices and do business there. And there are some challenges in terms of the Internet system and also in terms of the ICT communication system. But what's really interesting is where the opportunity, again, is in the 200 e-services for IT services. And this is all outlined in the Growth and Transformation Plan. And the other thing is in terms of anything that is sort of like equipment related or, for example, call centers or things of that nature, the opportunity is there. It's unlimited opportunity. It's fully open. And then the last thing I wanted to mention in terms of aviation, and the Ethiopian airline has a 15-year expansion plan in terms of aviation. And they have, in fact, recently been leaning towards the purchase of Boeing fleet. So where that becomes an opportunity is anything that has to do with supply chains. In fact, when I was there, we had 2 or 3 companies that had an inquiry about aviation parts and services, as well as we've had Ethiopian companies that are looking at trying to buy more of the private aircraft, like the Gulfstream aircraft or aircraft of that nature. And so if they're buying those particular aircraft and increasing their fleets, they're going to also have to have all of the mechanical services and the supply chain that goes with that. Not to mention that there is a current plan in Ethiopia at looking at airport passenger expansion at the current Boli airport site, as well as they're putting together a plan to look for another airport in the area. So can we move to the next slide? Renewable energy. So one of the things I've already mentioned is that they have this ambitious renewable energy expansion plan for 5 years. And I think that's really interesting because when you think about it, they have 90 million people, and there's a current shortage in meeting this demand. And they're expected to try to increase this demand 30% yearly. And in fact, in terms of one of the things I can give, I think is very interesting, in terms of the wind sector, there is currently a U.S. company that has a contract in place fairly recently to be the project manager for one of the wind projects in Ethiopia. And I think that's interesting because if you have any sort of equipment or supplies or anything that might tie into putting together a wind project, hopefully what we're trying to do is build that relationship and that market intelligence so that U.S. companies will have the heads up in terms of tapping into that project. And essentially having a U.S. company as a project manager, I know this from my engineering days, that's one of the pluses, one of the first stages. So I've already mentioned the 5-year growth and transformation plan. If you go to the Ethiopian government site and you actually can look on the left-hand side of their website, and you will actually be able to download that plan. And I would encourage anyone interested in doing business in the country to look at that particular plan. I mentioned also some of the untapped potential in terms of historic sites. Many of the Ethiopian sites, some of the sites, actually there's about 2 sites that are actually on the UNESCO World Heritage site listing, and it's commonly referred to as the second Jerusalem. And these are beautiful sites. And as I said, the tourism, the transportation for getting to these sites is in place. What's lacking in terms of the hotel facilities. So companies that have anything that's in that sort of sector would be very well placed in terms of doing business in this market. The other thing that I think would be very interesting is as I mentioned, they have this 200 e-service for IT that the Ethiopian government is looking at contracting out. And that becomes interesting also in terms of any sort of marketing that one might do for hospitality services or supplies. The Ethiopia, for those of you who don't know, is also the headquarters of the African Union. So there are a number of international conferences that actually take place in the region, not to mention that recently what we've been seeing is the World Bank has expanded their facilities there, the UN has expanded their facilities, and a number of nonprofit governmental agencies are also expanding their facilities there. Not to mention, as I said, is when I was sitting in Sheraton, there were at least 5 companies that came by, and this was in the chemical section, pharmaceutical, healthcare, IT, and infrastructure, that indicated that they are looking at Ethiopia in the next year in terms of opening an office. Okay, next slide. For IT, I pretty much highlighted that the government has a monopoly there, but anything in, which is very interesting, again, I refer back to the 90 million people. Wireless penetration is at 4% versus the Sub-Saharan Africa average of 53%. And fixed phones are 1% relative to the average. And I think those numbers are very important because what those numbers highlight is the growth and opportunity that's there for U.S. companies. And this is something also where U.S. companies tend to shine because this tends to be more of a high-tech and a quality service. And that's something in terms of pricing where we can be a lot more competitive, and I've seen that in Africa. Right now, the Ethiopian government is trying to target their rural telecom services to 100%. You have 80% of the population in rural areas in Ethiopia. Now, the China company ZTE has the contract. We'll see what that might pan out to, okay? So Ethiopia has the lowest coverage in terms of ICT in Africa, but it certainly definitely has one of the highest potentials in terms of opportunities for U.S. companies, more in the areas, of, as I mentioned, the 200 e-services, call centers. I've actually had an inquiry from the government asking if there were U.S. companies that might entertain opening up an IT business park, and there's certainly incentives for that. They get tax incentives, land incentives. Land is always held by the Ethiopian government. It's leased on a 99-year lease. But in many cases, what they'll do is they'll give you the land if you develop certain services. And what's really important in terms of partnershiping with the Ethiopian government is if you can bring a technology transfer aspect to your particular investment scheme, meaning they want to train their people and they want to be able to have their people operate those systems. And so that's sort of what we call a social impact investment scheme for opening the door and doing business in Ethiopia. I mentioned the aviation, Ethiopian Airlines, very aggressive expansion plan, quality airplanes. I actually rode on one of the Dreamliners. Very, very good service. And it's one of the major, the number one airlines in Africa. And in fact, they've actually taken a 49% investment in Malawi Air. So they're on this major expansion process. The current Boli Airport is being funded by the Chinese government, but there is actually a new airport that they're looking at. They're looking for a siting plan for a new airport, and that to date has not been awarded, it hasn't been awarded to any entity. And that brings me a little bit to why people like to do business in Ethiopia, because they have low corruption, and it's a consensus building environment in terms of usually it's not one person who's making decision making. It's really important that if you're talking, you need to speak with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, also the Minister of Commerce. So it's consensus making, decision making, but the process is fairly fair and transparent. And at the other end, we have a huge diaspora community in the United States, which is very important in terms of having a local partner and doing business in this region. Hey,
okay, Tanya, that's terrific. That's really good information, and RJ, and just in the just because we're got a little bit of time left, Mike, do you want to just go ahead and just to see if we can do some Q&A here?
Sure. Actually, did you want to talk about the conference itself real quick, and then we'll?
Well, yeah, sure, Mike. And really, I mean, as you can hear the passion in Tanya, and I can say, I can guarantee you that RJ and myself share Tanya's passion. We could talk for hours about our, areas of responsibility, and we're happy to do so. But one of the best ways to get a hold of us in person is November 5th and 6th in Atlanta. I'll be coming back to Atlanta to talk about South Africa along with my deputy, and we'll be having one-on-one meetings with American companies that are interested in South Africa. I'll be making a presentation on South Africa, as RJ will be on Tanzania, and as Tanya will be on Ethiopia. And joining us will be our other commercial officers, our senior commercial officers from Africa and our other countries, and some of our State Department colleagues. We'll also have other representatives from U.S. government agencies like the U.S. Export-Import Bank. Mike, will you'll have access to the website where you can see the agenda. But this is going to be really the most significant gathering, certainly of Commerce Department-related folks that have a focus on Sub-Saharan Africa until the end of this year. So we would invite you to all join us in Atlanta, and then we can continue the conversation there. But let me leave it there for that. And Mike, if we want to just go ahead and do some questions.
Sure. Trish, can you go ahead and queue up the question?
Absolutely. At this time, we will begin the question and answer session. To ask a question, please press star 1 and record your first and last name. If you wish to withdraw your question, please press star 2. One moment, please, for your first question.
Thanks, Trish. I'm going to interrupt real quick. I've got a question online to either RJ or Tanya, but they ask how well developed are the retail channels, specifically supermarkets, convenience stores, and mega stores in both markets? Could you comment on that with somebody?
Tanya, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Well, I think for me it's a very simple response. As I indicated, you're talking about an economy that is pretty much ground up. So this is new territory. So there is opportunity in terms of bringing in goods and services and having access to goods and services, but this is not an economy that is developed. This is very much a grounds-up, economy that's just opening up, like the last frontier.
Okay, great.
Yeah. From the Tanzanian perspective, I would have to agree with pretty much Tanya's assessment. We don't have any large mega retail chains here, and we certainly don't have any major American retail chains. So, it's pretty open territory. I would say, though, that from the consumer goods side, we're sensing that Tanzanians are very interested in American consumer goods, and there's a growing middle class here. So I could see eventually some franchising opportunities potentially. But right now, in terms of retail, no, we don't have. It's open.
Great. Trish, we'll go ahead and take the first question.
All right. The first question comes from Wole Adoyi, and please forgive me if I mispronounced your last name. Go ahead. Your line's open.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the information. Appreciate it. My name is Wole Adoyi. I'm a pharmacist by profession. We do have a drug wholesale, and I just want to ask, what are the possibilities for pharmaceutical and medical supply in this market?
Do you want to start, RJ, and then I can...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for medical devices and supply, the thing is, the Tanzanian government has been, basically proffering health insurance and health care for its people for a very long time. This was formerly a socialist country. So we only have a number of private hospitals within Tanzania, mostly within Dar es Salaam. There may be one in Arusha. I'd have to check on that. But in terms of, medical supplies, it's mainly either more low-end medical supplies or potentially used medical supplies that I think that we could make some headway on here. In terms of the higher-end stuff, that would all probably have to get purchased by the Tanzanian government. So MRI devices and things of that nature, we'd be looking at some kind of government tender, most likely. So again, it would be more of the medical supplies from, I would say, a mid-range to lower scale. And in terms of pharmaceuticals, I'd have to get back to you on that one because I think that there may be some opportunities, but again, the healthcare sector is really regulated by the government.
So just to echo, and then in light of the time, I would agree that the healthcare system in Ethiopia is regulated by the government, but the Ethiopians also, the government is looking at quality. They're in conversations right now with major supplier of medical supplies. What's different is it goes back to the social impact. They just don't want companies to come in and sell them supplies. They also want to have some sort of educational training that goes with it. So one particular company was exploring looking at a monitoring system, and there was a Chinese company that was offering a similar system, which was something like, I would say, 200% difference, cheaper in cost. But what they were finding out is that the doctors, the Ethiopian doctors, were being trained now. We're getting information for some of the medical doctors that this particular Chinese system was causing increased infection because of the quality of the material. So now the government has come back and looked at, medical supplies and pharmaceutical, and they're more interested in quality over costs for their people. But to be able to get that across, you need to have a technology transfer sort of educational program attached with your particular product. I hope that answers your question.
That's great. Thanks, Tanya. Trish, we'll take another one.
Yes, the next question comes from Lanre Osinowo. Go ahead, your line's open.
Good afternoon. My question is posed to Ms. Tanya, and I wanted to find out, are there any opportunities in the agricultural space, whether from a food processing or equipment standpoint, any opportunities in Ethiopia?
Yes, thank you for your question. For the food-related area, I'm a bit new to the post, so I would ask you to send your question in, and if you send it to Michael Waters, I can actually give the foreign agricultural officer, get it over to your staff and be able to address your specific question. In terms of ag equipment, yes, there's a huge market for that. I think I mentioned that 80% of the population is rural. But that stated, again, there is opportunity. Most of the ag equipment that's being sold there is being sold through China and also financed through China. So if you were to bring in agricultural equipment, you would need to actually come up with some creative ideas on how you could help them to finance that particular equipment, either through like maybe an XM scheme or something of that nature. Okay?
Yeah, just to comment on that, both the questions. Of course, business is a very personal, one-on-one type thing, and you all have unique products and services to offer. So the best thing to do on any of your questions that we might not be able to get to, and if you certainly are looking to pursue specific markets, whether it be Tanzania, Ethiopia, South Africa, even China, just send Mike a message with your question, and we'll connect you to our network. Remember, we have a presence in 100 American cities, and we're in over 70 countries overseas. So the main thing is to connect with us, and we can work with you directly on your specific questions.
That's great. Thanks, Don. Trish, I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions.
All right. Your next question comes from Craig Gordon. Go ahead. Your line's open.
Great. Hey, thanks, everyone, for a great call today. Working in Africa with the medical side, I have a lot of products that are made here in the U.S., and having a difficult time of trying to find the right contacts at the Ministry of Health and really getting any foothold outside of, say, South Africa and a few other spots. Is this something you can help us with?
Yeah, Mike, from the Tanzanian perspective, come visit. We'd be happy to try to set up some meetings for you and get you in to meet with some of the health folks on the government side who could give you the lay of the land and answer some of your questions more in depth. That shouldn't be a problem. I would say, though, that, kind of a global comment about the Tanzanian market, just for everyone's benefit, is that it is very price sensitive here. And as soon as I got on the ground, I started asking people, I was like, if you were me and you were going to be telling U.S. companies, about the market and encouraging them to come here, what kind of advice would you give? And I've seen this firsthand now over the past 6 weeks, the price sensitivity, but also the ability to find the best connected people. Connections here and networks are very important. And so I think really my value add over the next couple of years for you, the American business person, is going to be to try and find you the best kinds of networks and connections that you can find here in Tanzania. And if starting out, sometimes I think it would be talking with government officials, if that could be one entry point, as well as the appropriate people within the particular channel that you're working in.
I just want to add for Ethiopia. Ethiopia does have it's called the Ethiopian Investment Agency, and it's a great place as your first stop in terms of if you have a particular idea or a particular product or a particular investment scheme that you're interested in. Because one of the things to do business in Ethiopia, you do need a local partner, because it's actually required. You have to have a local partner, and that partner needs to be registered with the Ministry of Commerce. So hopefully what we'll be able to put together, and I think it would be nice, is kind of like a fact sheet, like doing business in Ethiopia. As Don indicated in South Africa, these kind of things need to be tweaked according to your particular product or requirement or service or investment that you might be interested in. But certainly we can give you a list of, like the Ethiopia Investment Agency. There's another agency as well. It's called the Business Promotion Director, which is out of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then if you were trying to set up some sort of corporate activity in terms of the power sector, there's another agency. So there are specific points of entry. But again, as I indicated, to do business in Ethiopia, you have to have a local partner on the ground, and that's something that we should be able to help you with. That's where I would like to put my value added. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Trish, I think we'll take one more question for this afternoon.
The next question comes from David Hoff. Go ahead, your line's open.
Yes, this has been a great presentation. I'd like to say that first, but Mike, earlier you mentioned that this is the second of a two-part presentation. Is there a recording of the first part, and what was that about?
There is. Our first webinar was on September 11th, actually. We did it on Nigeria and Ghana. I do have a recording of that webinar. I'm in the process of posting it to YouTube, having a little bit of difficulty, but hope to have it up later this week. Planning on posting this one as well if you know of anybody that might be interested in these two markets. And I'd be happy to send out both links either way to today's registrants.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. My pleasure. And I think with that, I'd like to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Don, RJ, and Tanya, for taking out some time out of your schedules and teaching us a little bit about these markets. I, for one, learned a lot today and very excited about the African continent as a whole. Really looking forward to the conference here in November, the Discover Global Markets Sub-Saharan Africa Conference, November 5th and 6th. I'd like to invite everybody to join us. If you have any questions about it at all, feel free to give me a call or send me an email anytime. I'm happy to answer those questions for you. And also, if we weren't able to get your question answered today on the phone or via email or whatnot, please send those as well, and I'd be happy to send those to the appropriate senior commercial officer over there. And if that's about it, I think, thanks again for everyone for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in Atlanta in November. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference. Participants, you may disconnect at this time.